With Quentin Tarantino being considered one of the best filmmakers of all time and his final film on the horizon, here's all 10 Quentin Tarantino's films ranked from worst to best. Spoiler alert for all these movies, and let's begin. In last place is Jackie Brown. I always feel bad for this movie as it's a good film on its own, but always gets a reputation as his worst film just because it's not as good as his other films. I think it's pretty good, and it's definitely Tarantino's most unique film. It's the only one of his films based on a book, it has the least amount of violence, and probably his best soundtrack. That's right, for a director who is known for having great music in his movies, this may be the best. Samuel L. Jackson kills it in this movie, Tarantino knows how to write dialogue for him, and he's chilling as Ordell. Robert Forster is also very underrated in this, and Robert De Niro is giving a performance different from what you usually expect from him, but the thing that holds us back is the ending. The third act of this film sets up a shootout of some kind between Jackie Brown and Ordell, and at this point in the story, Ordell is pissed. He just killed his partner, lost most of his money, and he's hungry for blood. So you got angry, vengeful Samuel L. Jackson hunting down our main character, and a terrified Jackie Brown preparing for a fight, terrified for her life. There are so many cool directions you could go with this, and they spend so much time building tension, making you think what is going to happen next. Finally, Ordell finds her, he walks in, about to talk to her, and then Michael Keaton comes out of nowhere and shoots Ordell in the face. And then he's dead. It's just such a disappointing way to end things, and it sucks out all the tension when you realize Ordell had no chance of surviving that situation. It's like if at the end of Pulp Fiction, instead of having that Mexican standoff and that cold monologue by Jackson, John Travolta just shoots him off in the face and the movie ends. The whole plot with the money is also kind of confusing.
Right, the same one Simone gives me. Okay, now Simone and I...
Well, you was supposed to do that. Now that shit worked my nerves, you and that motherfucker being so buddy-buddy.
Hey, if I wasn't so buddy-buddy with that motherfucker...
This afternoon before I came here, he was at Ordell's apartment in Hermosa Beach.
Think they bought it?
Oh, yeah, I got him thinking that Ordell's...
No. Ain't no thing. You know, everything the same.
If he finds it, I'll say Mr. Walker put it in there. And I didn't know anything about
That's
it.
way too hot for him to bring in his
Got to
money.
do it in the fitting room with a woman.
Fellas, we're about 6 beers deep, so I think you're gonna have to be a little bit more clear, because I didn't get that last part. I missed out on the whole thing, to be honest with you. I was confused by it.
With that said, I still like this movie for its uniqueness and Tarantino's filmography. I think this review sums it up the best. I like how imperfect these people are. Max Cherry isn't a badass gangster in a black and white suit, he's a slub with thinning hair. Jackie Brown isn't a master criminal. Luis Garro forgets where he parked his car at the mall in the middle of a robbery. They're just people. I think some of Tarantino's later movies, great as they are, could use a little bit more of that humanus. Ooh, frick. Some consider this their favorite Tarantino film, but compared to his other films, I wish this movie just had a bit more bite to it. I'm not saying it needs more violent or more badass dialogue, just a more satisfying ending. Next up is Kill Bill Volume 2. This film has the same issue as Jackie Brown, whereas there's a lot of things I love about it, but on paper it's kinda disappointing. Volume 1 was full of over-the-top action and violence. That scene of the bride fighting the crazy 88 in black and white and ripping people's eyes out of their sockets, it was awesome and I wanted more of that. And apparently there was more of that, a whole other movie of ultra-violent, over-the-top action scenes. But Volume 2 isn't like Volume 1. There's only one big fight scene in the entire movie and that's it. It spends more time exploring the bride's backstory and her training, and while I like that, it's still kind of disappointing when the last film ended like this. With that being said, despite having a lot less action than I expected, I still like the more character-focused story that they have here. Bill is one of my favorite villains of all his movies. The fact that he never raises his voice even when he's mad makes for a chilling presence, and David Carradine is a fantastic actor. It's a good follow-up, but I'll probably need to go into it with the right expectations to fully appreciate it. Next up is Death Proof. This one is frustrating. There's some stuff in here that I love, but the structure of how it tells a story feels thrown together, which it probably was. This film was originally the first half of a 2-part anthology film called Grindhouse, with Robert Rodriguez directing the second half, but when it didn't do so well at the box office, they split it into 2 movies, and then we got a 90-minute cut, a 2-hour cut, and a lot more cuts. I think I saw the approximate cut. So the first half was really good, kind of a slow burn, but Kurt Russell's on fire here. This may be his best performance, and seeing this former stuntman eat nachos and flirt with these women in a bar is way more entertaining than it's got any right to be. And then you get to those ultra-violent, over-the-top kills that only Tarantino can do, as you see stuntman Mike ram into this car, and you see their limbs getting cut off and their heads getting grinded by the tires. It was awesome. I was so pumped. But then, just as the movie was getting really good, it just stops. and then it restarts. It starts over. We're introduced to another group of women. We play out the same plot beats of the first half, and I am 100% convinced that in the Grindhouse version, it just stopped when Kurt Russell kills all the women, because this last half feels like it was just filmed to give it theatrical runtime. But to its credit, once Kurt Russell starts killing again, it gets good again, as we see a lot of these crazy stunts and a really good car chase. So this film is kind of hard to rank. This film has some incredible scenes, impressive stunts, and a standout performance from Kurt Russell as Stuntman Mike. It's structured in a weird way and drags in some parts, but when it's good, it's fantastic. I think this is a part where I lose a lot of you. I just want to emphasize that I really like this film. I think it's great, and if you like it more than me, that's great. I'm not saying you're wrong for doing so. This is just my opinion. With that said, Pulp Fiction. Okay, listen, it's great, it's well made, it's cleverly written, the soundtrack rocks. I just don't love it. There's nothing bad about it, I just don't connect to it. There's nothing in here that makes me go, oh yeah, this is the best thing Tarantino has ever made. Oh, I think everything here is done better in his other films. Soundtrack, Jackie Brown. Characters, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Dialogue, The Hateful Eight. I'll get to that later. The one thing I will say this movie does really well is the pacing. Everything is tightly structured. It does suspense really well, and when I realized that the opening scene with Tim Roth ties into the ending, I was excited to see how things would play out. But even Inglorious Basterds had better pacing, so I don't know. Over time, it is growing on me. John Travolta as Vincent is a standout, and a film full of standout characters, but for how hyped this film is and how many people say it's the best film of all time, I was kind of disappointed. There's technically nothing wrong with it, but it's like a really well-cooked hamburger with no onions, no tomato, no ketchup, and no pickles. It's not bad. I would just rather take the hamburger with all the toppings in it. Speaking of the toppings, this analogy doesn't really make any sense. Next up is Kill Bill. This is pretty much the opposite of Pulp Fiction. In that film, the writing is pretty much perfect and everything is well done, but there's nothing I really love about the film. There's nothing that stands out. In Kill Bill, it's not as cleverly written or subversive as Pulp Fiction, and it doesn't take itself as seriously, but it has qualities I love. The action is great, so over top, so well choreographed, and always doing something interesting with the lighting and camera. It's an adrenaline rush from beginning to end, even if there's no action. This entire movie is over top. There's a scene in the first 10 minutes when the bride knocks on a door, someone opens it, and out of nowhere the camera zooms into her eyes with a red filter as intense music plays. And the opening scene. Before we know anything about these characters, they just drop that on us with no explanation. And this movie keeps doing stuff like this until the end. It doesn't care what may seem ridiculous or over the top, it just does it, and it makes it so fun to watch. It has a hateable villain, an interesting hero, a fantastic climax, and it's a homage to samurai movies made by someone who clearly loves the genre. It leaves you with enough questions to come back for part 2, but enough answers to be a satisfying experience on its own. Next up is Inglorious Basterds. It's really hard to rank these next 5 movies. All these I would give a rating of 10 out of 10. They're pretty much perfect films to me. This is the last movie I watched in his filmography, and it's a good one to end things off with. Christoph Waltz as Hans Landa makes this movie what it is. All the scenes with Brad Pitt are cool and all, but whenever this guy is on screen, you can hear a needle drop. The scariest thing about Hans is that you never know how much he knows. He keeps his cards close to his chest, and when he tells you that he knows you're lying, it's too late. Compare this to the Nazi officer in the bar. Like Hans, he has great detective skills and is able to find out that they are spies in just 10 minutes, but he reveals what he knows too early. He tries to take them in before he has the upper hand and dies as a result. Everything Han does is carefully planned and thought out. He's patient and takes his time before he finally decides to go for the kill. The only character I could compare Hans Landa to is Lalo from Better Call Saul. Very charismatic and always with a smile on his face, but when he drops that smile, the soul from his eyes disappear. If this guy looked at me like that, I would shit my pants. The rest of the movie is also really good. You think that the mission would be tad too easy? The Nazis are basically locked inside this movie theater, and even if the fire doesn't take them out, the dynamite definitely would. But the way the mission derails and how Hans Landa expertly comes on top was really well thought out. The opening scene, the strudel scene, the bar scene, the entire third act, there's so many tense moments in this. You really feel like you're in enemy territory, and for an ultra-violent action film like this, the scenes with just dialogue are the most suspenseful. If I had one negative thing to say about it, there's a lot of subtitles of foreign languages, which makes sense, and it's not the movie's fault that I'm bad with subtitles, it just makes it harder for me to follow certain parts of the film. But that's just a small nitpick, still a fantastic movie. Next up is Reservoir Dogs. This is one hell of a film to start your career with. It's the shortest of Tarantino's films, but it does a lot in 90 minutes. I don't think there's any scene in this you can take out, they all contribute to the plot in different ways. Again, not to criticize Pulp Fiction because I really do think it's great, I've been dunking on this whole video, but it doesn't have anything like the scene where Mr. Blonde is torturing that cop who was stuck in the middle of you playing, making it clear that he doesn't care if he tells the truth, he just wants to torture him, but before he can set the cop on fire, Mr. Orange blasts him out of frame. Not only did I forget that Mr. Orange was even in the room with how invested I was, but it was probably the best possible way they could have revealed that Mr. Orange is a rat. It's also surprising how low budget this film is. It's honestly never crossed my mind, but we never see how big this manhunt is. We only hear helicopters and see a couple cop cars, but this film makes you think that the entire Los Angeles police force is looking for these people. I also love how they never showed the actual heist taking place, which at first I thought was kind of lame, but throughout the movie they really paint a good picture of what happened to the point where they don't even need to show you. It's the exact opposite of the rule show don't tell, but honestly hits harder by not showing us. Steve Buscemi shows once again why he's one of the most underrated actors of all time, and Michael Madsen is chewing up scenery like never before. And what an ending.
Watch this, Lise. You can actually pinpoint the second when his heart rips in half. And now.
And before I get to my top 3, if you're enjoying this video and want to see more like it, consider subscribing. Next up is Django Unchained. The one thing that makes this film stand out against the other ones are the characters. While I like the main characters in all of Tarantino's movies, a lot of them are pretty morally gray or straight up bad people who you technically shouldn't root for. Not to say this is a bad thing, it makes them more compelling and complex, but there's just something really refreshing seeing Tarantino film where the main characters are straight up good people. Dr. King Schultz may be the most likable character in all his films, and that doesn't mean that there isn't moral complexity in this film as well. This isn't mentioned often, but it really was a ballsy move to have a house slave be one of the main antagonists of your movie, but it really pays off. This may be Sam Jackson's best role to date. There's been a growing sentiment that he's one of those actors who plays the same character in every movie, but this Unbreakable shows that he really does have range as an actor. The fact that he looks so old here and still played Nick Fury the year this came out is actually pretty surprising, but the real standout performance is Leonardo DiCaprio as Calvin J. Candy. This movie was already really great, but the minute Candy is introduced is fantastic. Leonardo DiCaprio has shown that he could play likable, funny, mentally insane, and really hateable in other films, but here's just straight up scary. Even Hans Landa, who I said earlier was my favorite Tarantino villain, was as intense as Contra Candy. Every scene he's in, you get a sense that he's the biggest man in the room and he knows it. Which is the same for Hans Landa, but Candy is way more unhinged and unpredictable. Just a truly despicable character. Even Ernest in Killers of the Flower Moon has some empathetic qualities. Here he's both intimidating and soulless. The soundtrack, probably surprising none of you at this point, also slaps. When Django blows up Quentin Tarantino and the song Who Did That To You plays, and he comes out of the smoke, then riding to the distance with dynamite as the slave looks at him with tears in his eyes, that was near perfection. And there's so many other great music choices too. Playing a rap song in a western movie shouldn't work. Playing a rap song while Django shoots people in slow motion shouldn't work either, but it ends up being one of the most badass scenes in the whole movie. In other words, while not being the most complex Tarantino film, it is the one I've rewatched the most often, and one of my favorite westerns. In second place is Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. I don't think I can truly express why I love this movie, but in short, everything is perfect to me. There's not one scene in this movie where I'm not having a blast. This may be Tarantino's best directing, best editing, and most importantly, best characters. Every one of the main characters are just so damn likable. Just seeing their normal lives is for some reason so interesting, while still giving some ambiguity to their backstories and morality. Is Rick kind of a jerk? Did Cliff kill his wife? Probably, but they're still very likable. The production design is fantastic and doesn't get nearly enough praise. This is the most 60s movie I think I've ever seen. It's like they got into a time machine with a 4K camera and just filmed this time period. The world feels so lived in and colorful. You can tell Tarantino really loves this period of Hollywood. This was made by someone who obviously loves movies and made a movie about filmmaking, and I'm not gonna lie, this could have easily been his last movie. I'm happy that he's making another one, but if this was Tarantino's last film, I wouldn't be disappointed. For a director known for making homages to different genres of film, this is a film that pays homage to film itself. The biggest complaint I heard about this movie is that it has no plot, but I disagree. The fight scene between Cliff and Jackie Chan is controversial, but it shows how good of a fighter he is, so it's not surprising when he beats people up. The flamethrower scene that seemed to be a one-off joke is pretty self-explanatory. The section of the film where Cliff goes to spawn movie ranch shows us that there is a dangerous conflict in this film, and that's a suspense and anticipation for what may happen. I think I like this film for the same reason people like American Graffiti or Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. It just transports you to a place and gets you invested while not having a straight up plot. At least I think that's true for those films. I haven't seen them. Of course, you could say this is a contradiction, as Pulp Fiction is a slow burn and that's way lower than this, but I'm just more engrossed in this film. Alright, I swear that's the last time I dissed Pulp Fiction. I really do like that film. You probably need to know some history before going into this, but I'll just tell you in 15 seconds. Members of the Madsen family who worked for Charles Manson infamously killed a pregnant Sharon Tate one night, and the murder was so horrific it's theorized that it ended the golden age of Hollywood that was the 60s into a more unhappy, cynical 70s. There, now go watch the film if you haven't. Overall, I think this is the most entertaining and wholesome movie Tarantino's made, but not my favorite. In first place is The Hateful Eight. It's interesting, going into this marathon, I thought that Pulp Fiction, Django Unchained, and Inglorious Basterds would be my favorite Tarantino films, and while I still love them, it turns out that my favorites are the 3-hour dialogue-heavy slow burns that lead to a fantastic third act. I was generally shocked that so many people put this at the bottom of their rankings. It's actually kind of like Jackie Brown, where some love it and some think it's just okay. Obviously, I'm one of the ones who love it. This film has some of the best dialogue I've ever heard in a movie. Every conversation is engrossing. I could listen to these characters talk for hours. What really makes this dialogue-heavy movie so interesting is the uncertainty of it. We don't know anything about these characters other than what they tell us, and the movie makes it clear that some people may not be who they say they are. For the first half of this movie, you're just waiting to see when things will go wrong as tensions rise. It's pretty much the Western movie version of John Carpenter's The Thing, right down to the same composer. The score for The Hateful Eight was originally going to be the score for The Thing, but was reused for this film. And I know this may sound crazy, but I think this may be my favorite score from Ennio Morricone. I don't know, it's either this or Once Upon a Time in the West, but the music really sets the malicious, mysterious tone this movie is going for, as just generally fantastic on its own. Walton Goggins is giving both the funniest and most underrated performance in Tarantino's filmography. He may be my favorite character, especially where he goes in the third act. Jeff Bridges is also giving a career best, hamming it up just the right amount. Hell, every actor here is fantastic. These are probably the most colorful and entertaining set of characters in any of his films, second to only Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Without going into every performance, Jennifer Jason Leigh is perfectly hateable, and it took me a good 5 minutes to figure out that was Tim Roth. I could go a lot more into this movie, but it is a mystery film, so in case some of you haven't seen it, I'm not going to spoil it. Just know that the last 30 minutes may be the best 30 minutes of any film. I may do a full review and breakdown on why I love this film in the future, so if you want that, tell me in the comments. I was not expecting much from The Hateful Eight, but it ended up being one of my favorite Western movies and my favorite Tarantino movie. But if you disagree with me and think Jackie Brown or Death Proof are the best Tarantino films, I wouldn't be mad. Even the worst Tarantino films, I can easily see someone else loving. I'm not doing this ranking for views, I just really wanted to talk about his filmography because that's how much his films resonate with me. And if this video resonated with you, consider subscribing and giving me ideas for future videos in the comments. Have a good day.